Hey guys, welcome back to the Dental Duo. My name is Kathleen and I'm an incoming student at Maryland School of Dentistry. Last cycle, I received 10 interviews, so today I'll be sharing with you my top 10 interview tips. First off, if you've received an interview, big congrats. At this point, you've proven to be a stellar applicant on paper and they already like you. And now, with the interview is your chance to just further impress them. In the interview, they are typically just looking to see if you can hold a conversation, if you're a good fit for the school, and they want you to expand on your application. So let's get started with my first tip. Practicing common interview questions. Now for this tip, I do not suggest memorizing your answers to these questions. In my case, what worked best for me was making concise bullet point answers. By having these short, quick answers written down, it allowed me to have a quick idea of what I wanted to talk about, as well as stay genuine during my interview. So like I said, don't try to memorize a huge answer to a certain question because you're just gonna sound monotonous and robotic. To help you guys out, I attached in the description a large document filled with a ton of common interview questions that I use to prepare, and it so happened to be that most of my interview questions were actually on this document. So I'm so glad I used this document to prepare. I want to share it with you guys so you guys can use it too. The questions that are highlighted in yellow were actually asked in my interviews. You'll also see a variety of hypothetical questions, personal questions, and questions about your application, so make sure to take a look at all of that. So in the beginning of the interview, in terms of common questions, I would say that why dentistry, tell me about yourself, and why this particular school are three of the most common interview questions. These questions also typically get asked in the beginning, so make sure your answer for this is really strong. So for my second tip, it would be to have at least 1 to 2 questions prepared to ask your interviewer. In all of my 10 interviews, the interviewer always asked me if I had a question. In my case, it was always asked at the end of the interview as to conclude the interview, but I have heard of instances where people get asked this in the beginning of their interview. So just be prepared for either outcome. Avoid asking a common question that can be found on the school's website or that was said at some point. Instead, ask unique questions about the school that will make you memorable. For example, in my case, I love student organizations, so my question revolved around that. And so I asked about the school's process regarding me creating a student organization. And by asking this question, it sounded pretty memorable and it showed my interest in contributing something to the school. Now for my third tip, it would be to read your application thoroughly. I received many application specific questions regarding my extracurriculars, my manual dexterity, shadowing experiences, etc. So make sure you know your application really well. I actually had one of my interviewers quote a specific sentence of the description for one of my experiences on my application, and he ended up asking me a question about it. So that showed me right there that they really looked into my application. So overall, just be prepared to answer anything about your application, as they can literally pull out any information and fact from your application and ask you a question about it. So with that being said, if you're doing a mock interview, I would recommend having your interviewer have access to your application so they can ask you specific questions. As for my fourth interview tip, I would say to do not downplay any of your achievements and experiences. I know interviews can feel a little intimidating and scary, but you have to try and be as confident as you can. But also finding a good balance between being too confident and cocky versus too humble. You want to try to sell yourself in a really humble but confident manner. So practice this manner of speaking in your mock interviews and really make sure you don't sound too humble to the point where you're downplaying your experiences. And for my fifth interview tip, it ties in with what I was talking about in my fourth tip about being confident, because at this point, they already like you, they've already looked at your application, and they have a positive image of you already. So something I did not expect was to be gaining confidence throughout my interview. I thought I was just going to be nervous the whole time and that it was just going to be very monotonous and an interrogation. However, don't get me wrong, some interviews do feel a little bit more like an interrogation, but for the most part, what really gave me some confidence during my interviews was when they asked me very specific questions about my application. You'll see, but being asked multiple specific questions about your application gives you that sense of confidence and makes you feel proud in a way, because it's like, oh cool, they kind of looked into my application, they're asking me these questions to want to get to know me more. So you kind of get a little boost of confidence. And also when you talk about yourself and your achievements and your experiences, you'll see that you'll feel accomplished and you'll feel excited to talk about it, which will radiate positivity and give you a great look. Trust me, I was so worried about being nervous in all my interviews. I was freaking out. I couldn't sleep. I was really nervous, but after I did a few interviews, I realized that you get pretty confident when you start talking about yourself and they ask you questions about yourself. So don't worry, you'll feel comfortable pretty quick. My sixth tip is to be prepared to talk about any possible limitations to your application. Whether it's a low DAT score or a lack of shadowing hours, just be prepared to talk about why you maybe couldn't meet the school's expectation on whatever it might be. Schools may notice a weakness on your application and they may just straight up ask you about it, or they may ask you to be honest and explain about any lacks and areas of improvement in your application. So for my seventh tip, this is one of the more important tips in my opinion, it would be to know what to expect. If you tend to worry and overthink like me, this tip really helped me because knowing what to expect will help you relax a little bit more on the interview day and give you a little boost of confidence. Student Doctor Network is a great resource. They have a thread all about common interview questions specific to each school. This is a total must read before any of your dental school interviews because on this thread, people will post the type of interview, how long it took, and most importantly, common interview questions. You'll get to see a whole bunch of different questions that were asked by the school. However, take everything you read with a grain of salt because some people might complain about their interview, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll have the same experience. So for this resource, I'd really just focus in on the questions and use those questions to practice. In this resource, you'll also see the type of interview. So there's two common types of interviews, closed file and open file interviews. In a closed file interview, your interviewer will not have access to your application. They know absolutely nothing about you other than your name. On the other hand, the open file interview is the more common type of interview. And in this interview, they do have access to your application and they have read all about you before you come into the interview room. So in these interviews, you can expect some more application specific questions. And for my eighth tip, if you're interviewing at an out-of-state school, you do want to make it clear that you are open to living in a new state and that you're not just relying on your in-state options. You want them to know that if you do get an acceptance from the school, you would be willing to live in this new state and this new city. Because a lot of schools may assume that you just want to go to your in-state option and maybe this out-of-state school is just a backup. So to avoid this, find aspects about the school's location that interest you, such as the weather or maybe a sports team. And for the ninth tip, be friendly and get to know your interviewer. Avoid sounding like a robot and just relaying questions to your interviewer. Instead, try and make it more of a conversation. You'll see in most of your interviews, they will also be trying to make it a conversation as well. So just match that effort and create a positive environment. Remember that these interviewers are people too, and you may have common interests with them. So talking about that will definitely make you more memorable. And finally, send a thank you email. I would say like a day after your interview, sit down and write a nice post-interview thank you letter to the people that interviewed you. If you did not get the email address of the specific interviewers, it's okay. You can just email the general admissions office and direct it to the people that you interviewed with. By writing this email, it shows that you want to finish off on a good note and that you put in that extra little effort. Right here, I attached an example thank you email that I sent. So overall, you guys are going to do amazing on your interviews. And if you have any questions about the whole interview process, please feel free to leave a comment below or send us a DM on Instagram. Also, reach out to Nico and I if you would like to schedule a mock interview and we'll be happy to fit you into our schedule. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram at The Dent Duo because the dental school content is soon on its way. Nico recently started his first week at Penn and I actually move into Maryland tomorrow. So stay tuned for all this fun content. Last thing, if you check out our Instagram, you can see I made a little post detailing about more interview tips and tricks, so make sure to check that out at The Dent Duo.